Hello, I'm Wayne from TorqueCars. So we're going to look at the problem of overfilling your engine oil and how to deal with it. What are the problems that you cause when you've got too much oil in your engine? How do you remove that oil? And more importantly, how do you actually check the level of oil in your engine? So we'll start off with the logical thing, how to check the level of oil in your engine. Now you need to make sure that your car is parked on a level surface. If it's on an incline, you're not going to get a clean level when you actually check the level of the oil. It's all going to be on one side of the sump. So the sump is that big bowl at the bottom of the engine where all of the oil collects. Now every engine, generally speaking, there's probably an exception out there that I'm sure someone's going to tell me about in the comments, but they all have a dipstick. Now looking in the front of the engine, and it's often yellow or orange or brightly coloured, and you just pull it out. It's a little stick within a tube that goes into the sump of the engine. Now when you pull that out for the first time, you'll notice it's covered in oil and it doesn't make a lot of sense. So you need to wipe it off and clean it. Now you need to make sure that the engine is cold, because when the engine has run, all of the oil is around the inside of the engine and you're not going to get the level that is in the engine. You're just going to get what's left in the bottom of the sump, which is usually much lower, and that's probably where most people go wrong when they fill their oil up. They use the dipstick to ascertain how much oil they've got in their engine, and a lot of that oil hasn't fully run down. So by the time they finish, they've overfilled the oil and they're going to start experiencing all these problems. So you find your dipstick, you pull it out, you give it a wipe, and then you put it back in and pull it out slowly. And this will show you where the level is. You've got an empty and you've got a maximum mark, and you should be aiming to make sure the oil is somewhere between the two, and preferably near the max level, because most cars will burn a little bit of oil and use oil. So you want to make sure that you're well within the threshold. If you've got a long journey coming up, check your oil levels and just make sure you've got sufficient in there. So what happens if you've overfilled your engine oil or you've got too much oil in there? So what are the problems that happen if you've got too much engine oil? Well, in the bottom of the engine you've got the crank, which is spinning at up to 6,000 or 7,000 RPM. Now when you smash your hand into water, you'll notice the water isn't particularly soft anymore. You can actually bruise your hand or hurt your hand if you hit it really, really hard. So think about your crank going into this pool of oil at high velocity. It's not going to do it any good. It's going to cause a lot of vibrations. It's going to be sapping power from the engine. It's got all that extra effort to plough through this puddle of oil. So you certainly don't want your crank to be splashing around in the oil. The other thing is that constant churning of oil will turn the oil into a foam. You're basically making cappuccino style foam inside your engine, and that's going to inhibit the oil pump's ability to get that oil around the engine and lubricate it. And the oil itself, it's now bubbles and you've got lots of air in there, so you're getting insufficient coatings of oil and it's just not going to flow as well as it did. So the engine is going to experience a lack of lubrication, which is a really big problem. So when your oil pressure in the engine gets too high, you start to experience leaks of oil. So the gaskets, the rubber seals, even by the pistons into the combustion chamber, and it will typically start burning. You'll notice a white or a blue smoke coming out of the exhaust, which is a classic sign that your car is burning oil. So if it's been overfilled, the first thing you really need to do is get that oil out and make sure you've got the correct level of oil, and then you can start diagnosing problems. In my experience, once an engine has started to leak or a seal has started to leak, just correcting the problem that caused that leak is not usually enough to fix it. You've now got to address the oil seal or whatever it is that started leaking. Sometimes you get away with it, so that's good. But be ready for problems that happen. You may well be causing damage to your car just by having too much oil in the engine. Having too much oil also finds its way into all sorts of areas of the engine. If the engine is burning oil, as we've just mentioned, that can damage your catalytic converter. If you've got a diesel engine, it can block up your particulate filters. You're getting much bigger soot particles going into the filters, so they will eventually get clogged up, or they start to burn. The temperature may get too high in those items and they could well burn out. So you're causing damage to all of those pollution controls as well. Also, your spark plugs are quite prone to fouling in a petrol engine. If the oil's getting into areas it shouldn't, you're going to accelerate the carbon build-up, and those spark plugs are not going to work as effectively. So you may even start to experience misfiring and other similar problems. So how do you deal with the problem? You've got too much oil in your engine. How do you get it out? Well, there's a few methods, and the method you use probably depends on who you are, whether you're a competent DIYer. Let's assume you're not, because we've overfilled the oil level in the car. So just going to a garage and getting an oil change will usually address the problem. You've got a professional there who is able to drain the oil off and refill it to the correct level. Now, when you put oil into your engine, it's really helpful to know what the capacity of your engine is. Most cars I've had, it's been about 4.5 litres of oil, and we typically buy oil in 5-litre containers in this country. So what I would do is get the 5-litre container and I will drain off 1/2 litre of oil. So I've got the 4.5 litres, or whatever the capacity of your sump is, and you can just pour that into the engine, and then it's just a matter of letting it settle and double checking. You just want to make sure that you've not got a weird engine off the production line that's some exception to the rule, and it needs more or less oil than the other models. So that will usually mean as well you have to pay out for an oil change, which you're replacing the oil. You're probably replacing the oil filter and the sump plug, so that means you're paying out to have the job done again. So that's a little bit of a waste of money. So can you drain the oil off? Well, it's not actually that easy to drain oil out of an engine. It's better to underfill it than overfill it. So if you're not sure, always err on the side of caution. But you've got the sump plug at the bottom of the engine. Now, I always recommend whenever you undo the sump plug to replace the washer on it. You might get away with using the old washer, but it's a good idea to change the washer. So slacking it off a little, you may get a dribble of oil coming out. But what generally will happen is as soon as the sump plug is removed, you'll get a jet of the oil coming out of the engine into your catch pan, and you'll have to top it up again. And you've got the problem there of not actually knowing how much oil is in the engine already and how much you've drained out, and you're just creating this guesswork situation that could go on and on and on indefinitely with you adjusting the levels and trying to get it right. So the sump is probably not the best way, but in most people's minds it'll be the easiest, but it does present challenges just with the way it gushes out, and it's difficult to just take a little bit of oil out of the engine doing that. Now, a lot of people may also think about the oil filter. If they loosen that and drain that out, they'll reduce the level of oil in the engine. Now, most oil filters are actually on the side of the engine, or they're at an angle. So although you might think it contains 1/2 litre or 200 mils of oil, in reality, most of that will drain out and go down into the sump. That's the way they've been designed. So taking that off, it's well above the sump, and there's not much that's going to drain out of the engine. So you probably won't achieve very much by slacking off the oil filter at all. So another method of draining oil out is to use a very thin air tube and poke that down the dipstick hole into the engine, and use a syringe to just syringe off the oil. That allows you to measure quite precisely how much oil comes off. If you've just got the hose, if you've got a high pressure airline, you can blow that across the top of the hose, and that will create a suction within the hose, and it'll pull the oil out. You really do not want to be sucking oil. Oil contains a lot of nasty additives. It can be quite dangerous to have on your skin, and you certainly wouldn't want to be inhaling it or ingesting it. So don't use your mouth and don't suck. So hopefully this has been helpful to you. It's covered the bases on what to do if your car is overfilled with oil. We've highlighted the dangers and problems that can happen to your engine through having too much oil in it. And we just encourage you to keep an eye on your oil level, because having too much oil is not good for the engine, but having too little is equally detrimental to the performance of your engine. So please stay tuned. If you haven't done so, please subscribe. You won't miss out on future videos and features we've got coming up. And please like this video, because it really helps us to get out there. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.